Hey, you guys hear me? Yeah, cool. My name's Nat Welch. I'm going to be talking about SRE and the presidential campaign. Um, I've been an SRE since about 2012. I was a full stack dev before that, and I worked on the campaign, the Hillary Clinton campaign specifically, from the January 18th of 2016 until December 31st of 2016. And I'm ICO on Twitter, like ICCO. So some general stats about the Hillary for America organization, which is the organization created to sort of run the Hillary Clinton presidential bid. It started when Hillary Clinton announced her presidency on April 12th, 2015, and it ran through November 8th, 2016, presidential election day here in the US. The number of days between the announcement and election is 577, so there was essentially no one working on the campaign day one, and 4,000 people were fired on day 577. Sorry, laid off is the correct term. There were 60 elections that happened during those 577 days, 59 Democratic primaries, and one presidential election. The tech team that supported that at the end of the campaign was a little over 80 people, and like I said, had a little over 4,000 employees. When I joined in January, just for like general like growth rate, the team was about 30 people. The tech team was about 30 people, and the whole organization was like 300 or 400, if I'm remembering correctly. This is where I'd have a slide that has text so small you can't even read of quote-unquote important dates. But basically every day starting February 1st, which was the first presidential primary, was a deadline. There were a few before that. There were a few, as soon as you launch a campaign in the United States for president, you have to start filing with the FEC. You start quarterly and then quickly go to monthly as soon as any election starts. And then because there's 59 Democratic elections between February 1st and June 7th, there's like at least 2 or 3 a week. The tech team was shipping software for essentially we'd pick certain primaries that were very important to the campaign, and we would ship software around that. Plus, we managed all of the software for writing content and things like that, and they were publishing hourly. People were often awake. I was actually talking to someone earlier today, and one of our like hard hiring requirements was you had to be willing to work in Brooklyn, which is where our headquarters was. And you had to be willing to work 7 days a week and not really have any qualms about the fact that you weren't going to get any time off or sleep for most of the campaign. I think that's put in the hiring process as a bit of a like scare tactic almost. My like normal hours on like quote-unquote normal days were closer to like 10 to 7, which is pretty similar to like what I worked at like Google and other companies. But there were also like election nights where, because we're on the East Coast, like the election doesn't even close until 9 or 10 p.m. And so, at the very least, for SRE, like our primary on-call was there until usually like 1 a.m. those nights. And then there were people who were writing content, like research team and communications teams that were there till like 3 or 4 that morning, and then back at it at like 7 the next morning. So it's a never-ending thing, as you may have seen by just the never-ending stream of news over the past like 2 years. The general problems for a tech team interfacing with a presidential campaign are pretty kind of, I guess, what you would guess. I hadn't really thought about it before joining a campaign, but the first one is short timelines. Because there's only 577 days, and those are agreed upon before the organization's even created. Like all of the deadlines are already set in stone. So if you want to launch something for a debate, which we did for every single debate, like that has to be done by like 6 p.m. that night, because people are going to be using it, and it's going to be like announced. It's in like the candidate's speech that she's already planned and prepared to have that night at like 7 p.m. Going on national television. There's not a lot of money, which is actually kind of surprising to a lot of people, because You may have heard that like the campaign raised like $1.5 billion or something like that. Most of that money goes to TV ads. TV ads are very expensive in the United States. And also a lot of it goes to paying all of those employees. And if, and so like very little money went in towards like our AWS budget and our salaries. We did get paid. I think that's like a common misnomer. Like most of the employees of the campaign were full-time employees. We had full benefits. Like I had my glasses that I was wearing earlier were paid for by HBase Healthcare. But it is not like a normal like SF Bay Area tech salary. There's weird spiky traffic. No one goes to your website. Like if you're used to working on like a site like Reddit or Google or something like that, you're used to just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go to this website and like use it. No one goes to HillaryClinton.com like just as like a, oh man, I'm wondering what policy paper Hillary wrote last night. Like man, it doesn't happen. So like traffic in general is pretty low. But what does happen are callouts. So pretty much every time HRC, because most politicians are referred to in 3-letter acronyms thing I learned on the campaign. Whenever she spoke, she would like at like on a televised, like nationally televised thing, like that would pretty much drive like a 10x spike in our traffic. We also just had a pretty constant linear growth from around the start of the primaries to the end of the campaign, which is like the beginning we started at about like our like high during the day would be like 1,000 requests per minute, and we ended the campaign at around 40,000 requests per minute. We followed like a classic U.S. diurnal cycle, like when the only people who can donate to your campaign are U.S. citizens. It kind of matches, you know, when people are awake. Surprise, surprise. And our largest call out, which happened, was actually completely by accident, which we named the Franken bump. For those of you who know Al Franken, he's a senator. He spoke at the Democratic National Convention, which was sort of one of the largest watched events for us. And he's like, if you go to HillaryClinton.com now, you can get a free flight to Philadelphia, where the convention was being held, and meet Hillary Clinton. That was a 45x bump in our normal traffic. And yeah, so Al Franken. A lot of people really wanted to go to Philadelphia. And then email, like most of the reason people do go to the website is we had a very coordinated email campaign. Our conversion rates were as high as like 40% in some cases, much lower in like a lot of cases, but you know, we got very good at targeting email to the right people to convince them to donate. And so we had a very optimized donation flow to get people to donate. There's lots of vendors, which is just like a normal, I guess, like problem for a smaller business. But because your company like creates and dies in a year, there's lots of them. Tech is not a core competency of politics. It's just like a thing. So there's a lot of sort of training for people who are interacting with like a large scale sort of digital organization for the first time. Many of the people who work, like their previous jobs were like Senate campaigns, which have 3 employees. And now they're dealing with, you know, software and tools with a much larger organization. And some of the older people who've been in politics for a long time often aren't technically literate. The like common story that's told, which I have no way of validating, is that like some senators still get their email printed out every day. Yeah, so just like as a metric. And then you may have read the news, security was like a thing. So we kind of had 2 types of teams inside of the tech team, or 2 like sub-teams. One was what I like to categorize as support, which was we had the ops team, which is what I worked on, which was our SRE and security team, which was about 6 people. We had our data infrastructure team, which sort of handled all of the ingress of data, storing it in a data warehouse, and then making sure our like data analysts could access it and do good things with it. Our front-end ops, who built tools for building front-end websites, which will make more sense in a second, why we had that as a dedicated team. Product, traditional product managers, and then design, because design is important. And then the other half was sort of our execution or product teams. These changed often as we grew, and sort of whatever the priorities of the day were. But near the end of the campaign, to kind of get an idea of like what was important to us, the teams were fundraising, raising money, organizing, which was helping our volunteers, voter, which was essentially getting out the vote and contacting more people and getting them registered to vote, engagement, which was essentially like things you saw on Facebook and Twitter, and storytelling, CMS stuff, mobile. We had apps. Our general infrastructure was essentially Fastly, which is a Varnish as a Service product. They handled all of our edge problems, so essentially every like attack below a layer 7 we didn't care about, because Fastly was just kind of like, yeah, we're getting like TCP fragmentation attacks, shrugs. But then if we got sort of malformed like HTTP requests, that passed on to our Varnish, which we wrote and modified often. Behind that, all of our content was static, which makes surviving your large DDoSes from people who didn't like Hillary Clinton easy. We had about 150 like static React apps, if that like means anything to you. But essentially, people would create small subsites for all sorts of things, events, fundraisers, etc. We had an API gateway, which was a simple Django server that did routing to our around 100 plus backends. Because we hired so quickly and we had such a short timeline, we followed the like developer bring your tool. Like a common thing that would happen is someone would start and they would have to basically launch a service in like 2 weeks. So we, as the ops team, tried to help them push through it. Behind that, databases, RDS, Elasticache, hosted Elasticsearch, sort of all Amazon database management. Then we had Syncs, which was managed by a data infrastructure team I mentioned, which then pushed into our data warehouse, which was Vertica. Running a little short on time, so I'm like speaking faster. We basically assumed deploys would happen about 100 plus times a day, both to our static and backend sites, because we had so many people changing all kinds of stuff all the time. We used Travis to sort of build all this stuff, and a Spinnaker-like tool from one of our vendors called TimShell to essentially deploy the backend services. We built immutable AMIs, pushed them out, so you just as a developer said like, I want version 5 in prod for whatever, the auth service or whatever, and it would just kind of happen. Everything else was published to S3, and then like I said, all in front of Fastly. We did a bunch of sort of failover stuff, but that was only for emergency services. Otherwise, we were like US East, everything. Monitoring alerting, we sort of used the trifecta of Datadog, PagerDuty, and Slack. Because everyone's working every day, Slack was like a very valid alerting stream. We had a channel called Tech Audit, which was sort of our middle ground, things that we didn't want to page, but like that you should look at every day. And it was full of what we became to lovingly know as chat ops, which I didn't know was a thing before this campaign, but is apparently a buzzword. But basically, we had a bunch of cron-based Slack bots that would go and audit things like, does everyone have 2FA on their AWS account? Do all of the URLs that existed yesterday still exist today? Stuff like that. And provide alerts, disk storage alerts, stuff like that, that we need to look at in the middle. And we also had like traditional pages of things that would wake up our primary and secondary. We had among the sort of 4 SREs, they were kind of constantly in that. The general like ops life, sort of, if I broke down like a week, would be 30% of our time doing design reviews, education and planning. Because a lot of our engineers were junior, we like spent a lot of time. 30% reacting to incidents, getting paged, whatever, weird last-minute requests. 20% building tools for automation. I have like a long list of software that we built and then didn't open source, which I can go into if you'd like. But and then 20% sort of acting as spare hands for other teams. Our SRE team and security team, the ops team as a whole, tend to be a much more experienced developers and also have like a lot of very specific experience about weird things, such as security. So we tend to go in and do like random code changes for people and just kind of help with priorities that they didn't have. We wrote a lot of code. I had like a list of apps, which doesn't make sense to read off, and we're also out of time, I think. And I just want to say, kind of as a future thing, since a lot of people don't realize this, there's a lot of organizations out there who need sort of like your help and/or money. The like kind of common joke with tech team after the campaign is like, even if we don't go work for an organization that like we cared about for as much as the Hillary Clinton campaign, there are so many organizations that just need like a few extra $1,000s. And like if you donate like $50 a month or $5 a month, like that helps them a lot. Example organizations: ProPublica, ACLU, EFF, your local assembly person, Demand Progress, Free Press. There's also the USDS and 18F if you want to volunteer or work in the United States government. Those are all options. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Impressive work. Really sorry about this technical difficulty. Thank you again, Nat, for this ability to deliver this like a pro. Unfortunately, we won't be able to have a Q&A, so I invite you, if you have questions for Nat, please join him outside of the room, because we need to welcome the next speaker. Again, really sorry, and enjoy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys.